friends, welcome to this tutorial for the Holly Berry Seashore crochet baby blanket. So this is the blanket. It is in Christmas colors and it's a 4-row repeat. 2 of the rows are just a half double crochet in the back loop only, and then 2 of them you've got these puff stitch rows and you've got these shell stitch rows. So it's a 4-row repeat. You use 5 different colors, carrying the colors up the side so you have very few ends to weave in at the end of this project, and as a result you get this very dynamic textural pattern. I think it kind of looks like icing on a cake with all these different textures you have going on. Super happy with how this one turned out, and it's totally memorizable. Again, 2 of the rows are just half double crochet back loop only, and then the other stitches to get familiar with are shell stitch and puff stitch. It's finished with a camel stitch border, which produces these gorgeous ridges all the way around. It's fairly gender neutral, could be great for any Christmas baby. Or, you can do it in whatever 5 colors you like, and you can make it even more neutral or even more girly or boy baby blanket, whatever you want. So let's go ahead and get started. Hi, it's me from the future, in the dark evening light, so clearly the future. I forgot to mention during the tutorial itself, but you can get the full pattern on my website for free, dananeal.com. Just search Holly. If you would prefer an ads-free PDF, you can get those on Ravelry or Etsy. I'm also going to include all of those links in the description on the video. All right, I hope you enjoy the tutorial. For today's tutorial, unfortunately, I'm out of the Christmas colors I used for the original pattern, so I'm doing more of a fall palette instead, just for the demonstration. A couple of tips if you are going to choose colors other than what I've listed in the pattern. I would go with 2 darks, 2 medium to lights, and a cream or white for your border color and to use throughout the body of the blanket. You could also do like a dark and light version of the same color, so say dark orange, dark green, light green, and again a cream or a white. But for now I've got my 2 darker colors are this orange and green, medium to light colors are this yellow and this brown, and then I've got the cream. So let's go ahead and get started. Using my 5.5mm crochet hook, go ahead and put a slip knot on your hook, and we are going to chain any multiple of 5 plus 3 that is also an even number. So for example, if I was to chain 5 plus 5 plus 3 for this tutorial, that's 13. That's not a number, I'm not going to do that. So instead I'm going to chain 18 for this tutorial. So 1, 2, 17, 18. All right. Next, we are going to half double crochet in the second chain from the hook and in each stitch across. So where I like to work when I'm working into my starting chain is instead of the middle of the V's, turn this towards you and look for these back bumps. So the first back bump from the hook is right here. It's very close to the hook. It's kind of covered by the yarn here. So we're going to start in the second back bump from the hook. And go ahead and do your half double crochet. So yarn over, insert into that back bump, pull up a loop, and yarn over, pull through all 3. And we'll just do that across. All right, so there is our first row of half double crochet. At this point, we are going to join our next color. So I'm going to bring in my dark orangey color. And how I like to join colors is After completing the final stitch of the row, loop the yarn over in a way, you want to make sure you have a long enough tail to weave in later, and simply pull the yarn through. Then tighten up the tail on the color you just left behind. And look at how that practically disappears. And it looks like you're ready to go with your next color. And so I do that, and then I'm going to chain 1 and turn. For row 2, we'll begin with a half double crochet in the first stitch, and then we're going to begin our shell stitch row, slowly but surely. Alright, so to do the shell stitch, we're going to skip 2 stitches, and then we're going to work a shell into the next stitch. To keep the pattern memorizable, this shell stitch is comprised of half double crochets as well. So we had our first row of half double crochet, we're going to skip 2 stitches, and to work our shell we are just simply working 5 half double crochet into the same stitch. So yarn over, pull up your loop, pull through all 3, that's your first, yarn over, pull up the loop, pull through all 3, there's our second half double crochet, there's our third, fourth, and fifth. So let's take a look at that lovely shell stitch. All right, now we're going to skip 4 stitches. So mentally, a way to remember this or think of it is we just did 5 half double crochets in 1 stitch, which takes up the space of 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if we're working our next shell, we need 5 more stitches to take the place of that shell. So we skip 4 in between to basically give us 2 stitches on each side of the half double crochet, or excuse me, of the shell, to account for those 5 stitches. Maybe that's more confusing and I should have explained that later, but let's just go ahead. We're going to skip 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and work our 5 half double crochets into the next stitch. This row in the pattern is the least mindless row. It's still fairly mindless, but it takes just a little bit more focus to count out those 5 half double crochets compared to some of the other rows. So let's see, was that 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. And you're going to repeat that across. So we're going to skip 1, 2, 3, 4 again. And work our next shell. And then when you only have 3 stitches left in the row, 1, 2, 3, skip the last, well, skip 2 stitches and then half double crochet in that last stitch. So our shell stitch rows are framed out by just 1 half double crochet on each side. All right, and then this is curving a little bit here, but it's gonna even out, it's all gonna straighten out as we work, and then as we come around and do our border, it'll look great. So let me bring this a little closer so that it's a little brighter, a little easier to see, closer to the light. And again, once again, the shell takes up 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then same thing here. So if you're ever confused, like, wait, do I skip 2 or 4? Keep in mind that the 5 stitches, although you're working them into the same space, they're taking up the space of 5 stitches. So I hope that kind of mental note is helpful. All right, let's join our next color. So here I think I'm going to bring in my cream. And I will say, if you're selecting your own colors for the project, don't begin row 1 with your border color. It's nice to have the border really frame out the colors of the blanket without kind of blending into row 1 or your final row for that matter. So we're joining that color the same way, just pulling that loop through, tightening up the color we just left behind. Chain 1 and turn. So don't even think of the the color join as its own stitch, because it's not. Just join the color and then proceed in the pattern. Row 3 is to half double crochet in the back loop only of each stitch across. So yarn over, and instead of going under both loops like you ordinarily would for your project, only go under the loop further away from you. Back loop is relative to the way you are holding the project. And so instead of, again, going under both, go in the middle of your V through the loop furthest from you, yarn over, pull up that loop, and pull through all 3. And continue on. And you'll just work into the back loop of every stitch, so every stitch on the shell, and then your 2 half double crochets that framed out the last round across. And just to pause here, what that does, so I guess it's a little hard to tell with this darker color, but it helps define the shell stitches more, whereas on the back, you're not getting that nice definition. This is the wrong side of the work. This is the right side of the work. We are defining that shell a little more nicely. It gives it a bit more of a pop. So I'll set this down here. Let me pull it over, bring over the blanket so we can see some more examples. So here's one that's easier to see because it's in a lighter color. Working into the back loops is what gives the top this definition, whereas if we flip it over on the wrong side, it's just not nearly as defined. It still looks like a shell, but not as much, I guess, as it does on this side. So I just wanted to show that real quick. Now let's bring in color number 4. Join the color, chain 1, can you snug things up as you would like, and turn. Row 4 is our puff stitch row. And we are working closed puff stitches. I'll explain what that means when we get to it. And they're lots of fun and give you lots of great texture. So you're going to half double crochet in the first stitch. Then we're going to work a puff in the next stitch. The way the puff is designed in the special stitches section. Always look at this in designer patterns because there's many ways to do a puff stitch, including a closed or opened puff stitch. And so just make sure you read the notes for this pattern or any pattern. But let's go ahead and get started. So to make a puff, first yarn over, insert your hook, and pull up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook again, pull up a loop. You'll have 5 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop. You will have 7 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop. You will have 9 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through the first 8. This might take some effort. But there we go. Yarn over and pull through the last 2. There is our first puff stitch. Puff stitches push to the back of your work. They push more obviously when they are flanked by single crochets. But because we are alternating half double crochets with puff stitches, it doesn't push them to that side as dramatically. But that's just something to keep in mind. If you're ever working a pattern with a puff stitch, it should push to the opposite side of your work. So this is a wrong side row that we're working right now. All right, so half double crochet, puff, half double crochet. Let's work another puff stitch. Yarn over, insert our hook under in the stitch and pull up a loop, 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook and pull up a loop, 5 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, 7 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull up that loop, 9 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through the first 8 loops on the hook, yarn over, and pull through the last 2. So pretty! What makes this a closed puff stitch is that you're pulling through the first 8 stitches and then the last 2. There are other puff stitch tutorials where you yarn over and pull through all 9, or maybe you only get 7 loops on your hook and you pull through all 7. This pulling through the first 8 and then 2 gives you kind of this nice top to the stitch. It's very pretty. And I've linked an article from the Loophole Fox on the blog post that talks about the difference and shows the difference between a closed and opened puff stitch, which is lovely. All right, you are going to repeat this across. So puff, half double crochet, puff, half double crochet across, and you should end the row on a half double crochet. So the end of the row, it's looking a little puffy. We've got some tension things happening. Again, as you continue to work your project, this will all sort itself out, and especially after we put the border on, it'll just be smoothed out and beautiful. So we're going to bring in our 5th and final color, which is our green, and then from there we'll start carrying colors up the sides, which is super exciting. So chain 1 and turn. And here you can see those puff stitches really pushed forward onto this row. It makes our half double crochet rows, the ones that are underneath the puff stitches, really kind of disappear. They're just kind of a subtle little row to separate our puff stitches from our shell stitches. So that's just, I don't know, a quality of those rows. This row is just like 2 rows back. We are going to half double crochet in the back loop of each stitch across. So once again, turning your work slightly towards you, just insert into the back loop relative to you, and that is where you're going to work your half double crochet. And continue across. At the end of this row, I want to bring this closer to the camera so we can see all of the great texture we have going on already. Working into the back loops this row, it makes the top of our puff stitches more defined. I think that edge looks really pretty, almost like a ribbing going across. And we've got all our colors joined. Now, to move on to the next row, we are going to simply see what colors are available to us. Because we're changing color all the time in A, B, C, D, E order, yes, I could pick up my cream right now, but that's not what we want. We want to go back to our first color. So here's our long end here. What you're gonna do is pull this up, pretend this loop is like we're just joining new yarn, loop it over, and pull through. I'm tightening up that green. We're going to have this long float on the side of our work, and that's okay. That's another reason we add a border. Our border is going to hide all those floats as we go along, and maybe you're wondering if those floats are going to be visible. And if I pull up the other project, the finished project, and hold this very close to the camera, you can kind of see them. If I really hold it close, like here's a little bit of the green that you can see through Over here, here's some pink that you can see through. That is if I have this in your face. It's right up to the camera, right? From here, you can't really, I mean, you can kind of see, like, yeah, there's some green here, but it's so subtle. I think it's worth it to not have to weave in one row, like 2 colors for every single row. This blanket is 69 rows. That would be, what's 69 times 2? 138. That would be 138 ends to weave in. If you do this perfectly, you should only have to weave in 10 ends because this pattern only calls for 1 skein of each color throughout the body of the pattern. And then you'll have an extra skein of your border color. So presuming there's no like factory knots, when I worked this up, there were no factory knots in any of my skeins. And so, yeah, with no factory knots, you should only have to weave in 10 ends instead of 138. I think it's worth it to have the teeniest little peaks of color in that first round of your border. So there's a tangent for you. Let's go ahead and move on. Try not to accidentally pull this super tight, right? We don't want our blanket to scrunch up. It's better in general if your floats are just a pinch too long because it's easy to hide than if they're a little too tight and then oops, it's scrunched. So kind of just give it a little tug, chain 1, and move on. For the rest of the pattern, we are repeating rows 2 through 5. So this is another shell stitch row. Yarn over, work a half double crochet in that first stitch, skip 2, work your 5 half double crochets into that stitch, skip 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, work 5 half double crochets into the next stitch, and so on until you have 3 stitches left in the row. And with 3 stitches left, simply half double crochet in your last stitch. All right, let's pull up our next color. So if we backtrack, whatever came after your current color is what we're doing next. So next is our rusty orangey red color. Pull that loop up and wrap it over your hook. Pull it through and give this a little tug, tighten that, give this a little tug. Make sure it's not pinching your project and scrunching it up. Chain 1 and turn. So at this point you might be worrying or wondering perhaps about yarn maintenance because if I bring some of this on camera, these are starting to tangle. You've got a couple of options. You can see a photo on my blog. I kind of embraced the tangles and I just didn't really untangle my yarn all that often. By the way, this is a repeat of row 3 now. We're just half double crocheting in the back loop across. So I would untangle the yarn periodically, but otherwise I was kind of just tugging my current color through the tangles as I went. And again, just untangling periodically, like maybe once a day or something, or maybe every couple days, depending on how much crocheting I did on a given day. It is maintenance though. One of the reviews on Ravelry for another pattern of mine, where you work 5 colors and carry up the sides, the girl said something like, you know, this pattern produced a beautiful blanket, but it was way too messy to have 5 yarns attached, and I will not make this again. And so, fair, very fair, because it is kind of a hassle. But again, to me, it's so worth it to not have to weave in a zillion ends. There's these snap pouches you can get, and I'm not sure like what company makes them, but you can get, they're basically like a clear bag, like a clear rectangular bag with, let's say, 4 snaps throughout. I wish I had one so I could show you guys in real time or in real life, but and then you kind of nestle your yarn in between the area where the snaps are. And if you have a center pull, you need to have a center pull for this to not be annoying. You'd have your yarn in between the snaps, and you would pull the yarn that you're working on. And then what you can do is just flip the whole pouch, flip it over, and flip it back. Flip it over and flip it back. That should keep your yarn from tangling. Moogly has a video, which I'll link in the description, where she uses like a storage bin and has her yarns next to each other in the bin, and again, turns the whole bin, so everything stays in order. And if you're switching the bin or your bag back and forth in this way, like flip one way, flip the other way, then the yarn shouldn't tangle. It's when you keep going in the same order, like I do. I always turn the same way. Naturally, I always turn the same way. Then that's when your yarns get tangled. And so there are tools that you can get to make this less of a hassle, or you can embrace the tangles like I do. Okay, I've worked a couple more rows. The pattern ends on row 5. Like before you get to the border, you're going to end on row 5 of the pattern. This is actually row 3, but any half double crochet row will be fine to end on. So go ahead and trim all of those ends that are still attached, and then go ahead and fasten off. Now you can weave in your ends at this point in your project, or you can weave them in at the end. I will be weaving them in later. I always like to begin my border working in the upper right hand corner. Why? I find it so much easier to keep track of where my border has begun if I started in the upper right hand corner. And it also makes beginning your border easier because you're working into the top of stitches, so it kind of gives a more peaceful start. So what I do, pull up a loop of yarn in the upper right hand corner and chain 1. That attaches it. Round 1 is just single crocheting all the way around. I give you suggested stitch counts for the sides in the pattern for a border that lies flat. So first what we're going to do is place 2 single, excuse me, I just yarned over. We've been doing so many half double crochets that a single crochet round is, a little different for this pattern. So we're going to work 2 single crochets in the starting corner, putting a marker in that first single crochet. And we'll single crochet across the top, so pretty easy. I always recommend having a round of single crochet to start your border patterns so that it makes it easier to place more decorative stitches later on, since working into the sides can be fiddly. And then when you get to your corner, which in this case the corner we're just going to place as the very last stitch in this top row, which also makes it pretty easy too. All of my corners for this round, I work into the first and last stitch of this row and the first and last stitch of the starting chain. And so in the last stitch of this row, which is approaching, this is our chain where we fastened off, so it's not that bump right there, it's this. Work 3 single crochets, placing a marker in the middle single crochet. And then as you work down the sides, we're aiming to place about 4 single crochets for every 3 row ends. So in this project, I've got 11 rows here. And after doing some math for the measurements, we're gonna aim for 15 or 16 stitches along the sides. We have 17 across the top, not excluding our corners. And yeah, we should have 15 or 16 along the sides since I've got the 11 rows. It's math is how that's how that math shakes out. Make sure to enclose your floats as you work, and I mean, certainly don't just like work around a float when you're doing your border pattern, but also try to grab a loop or two of yarn. So instead of working around the whole post of this stitch, I'm going to find a loop of yarn here to pull up. So see how I've kind of split this stitch in half? Why? It'd be a lot easier to just work around the whole post, but if you work around the whole post, you're going to get a bigger hole that forms along the sides, which doesn't look as nice in my opinion. I think in a lot of people's opinions, perhaps. So even though that's a little easier, finding a loop to go under will create a nicer looking border, a loop or two. So here I've got a couple loops and I'm enclosing a couple floats. Maybe not floats, this one's just the end. Don't just crochet over the ends because that's not as secure as weaving them in. I am going to weave them in. Ordinarily I would either weave them in first or I would eventually, you know, weave them in at the end of making a blanket. Alright, slowly but surely. The first stitch over here, going into my starting chain, this will be stitch number 15 along my edge there. And then you place your 3 single crochets in that corner. And away I go. The nice thing about the way we worked into the back bump of our starting edge before, of our starting chain before, is now we've got this beautiful edge to work into for our bottom along working along the bottom of the border. It looks like you're working into the top of ordinary stitches, which is so nice. It takes the guesswork out of where to place your hook. It might be a smidge tighter than working into like the top of a half double crochet or something, but so much easier to identify your stitches when you work into the back bumps at the start. All right, I'm going to go ahead and crochet across, and then I will finish and meet you at the starting corner. Back at the start, I've got one more stitch to place, and we're going to place the last single crochet of this final side in the same space where we began. You should be able to identify as just, you know, insert your hook right at the bottom of those first stitches of the round. And then you can slip stitch join to that first stitch. All right, go ahead and chain 1 and we will move on to round 2. So round 2, working into the same corner stitch, we are doing a round of half double crochet. So go ahead and half double crochet, move up the marker, alright, and then place a second half double crochet in the same stitch. Working 2 of the stitch into the starting corner keeps the seam in the corner. Then go ahead and half double crochet in each stitch across. In this corner, well, in all your corners except the first corner, work 3 half double crochets, marking the second half double crochet. Putting your markers in the corners just takes the guesswork out. You don't have to try to identify the corner yourself. I'm going to go ahead and continue around, work your 3 half doubles into those 2 corners, and I'll meet you at the start. Alright, at the start of the round here, it's a little hard to see the whole swatch on camera at this point, but already you can see, look at how much flatter everything is laying. Remember, the starting row was kind of bumpy and things were kind of, you know, splaying or squishier because of all the texture in the pattern, but our border has just nicely smoothed out so much of that already, and we've only just begun. We're on round 2 of the border. All right, so now all we do, we're at the very end here. It's a little hard to tell, but here's our slip stitch join from the previous round, and here's our chain 1. So we're at the end here. Go ahead and half double crochet. Put one last half double crochet into that stitch. And so I'm going to go ahead and place a marker here so that that stitch, the last stitch of the round, is even easier to identify, because it can be tricky to know, okay, what was the last stitch, and then what's the slip stitch, and what's the chain 1. This is also going to be important for the next round because we're placing our last stitch in a slightly different spot for rounds 3 moving forward. So there's my last half double crochet of the round, slip stitch join. We are going to half double crochet in the 3rd loop around. So for this, here's our top 2 loops, and here is our back 3rd loop. So it's a little tricky with the corner stitch to identify. We're going to work a half double crochet in that back 3rd loop, place that marker, and then work a second half double crochet in the back 3rd loop because that's our corner, and then continue to do that across. So here we've got our front 2 stitches, and there's our back 3rd loop. Working in joined rounds like this in half double crochet gives us this back 3rd loop to work into to create the gorgeous ridges in our camel stitch border. So here it's already begun, that pretty ridge. So let's go ahead and get to the end here. All right, so here's our corner. I had just marked the top loops, but right behind you can see that back 3rd loop. Whoop. Let's go ahead and move up the marker. That was our 2nd stitch of the round. And there's our 2nd stitch of the corner. And then just continue around. This produces a super pretty corner. The join at the start is less pretty, unfortunately. I'm going to talk all about that when we get there. All right, we're nearing the end of this first round. We've got this gorgeous ridge that's going across. And now we're going to talk about this corner, which is kind of fiddly because it's not going to be a perfect continuous seam where we join. And so let's talk about it. So I've marked the last stitch from the last round, and I will work into that stitch, and then I need to place my last stitch. So I found, after a lot of testing, that to get this to look the best we can get it for the join, we're going to work our final stitch of the round into the chain 1. So here was our last stitch last round. Here is our slip stitch join. Here is our chain 1. The chain 1 is where we want to work our final half double crochet. So, and it's going to be fiddly because it's tight compared to working into your half double crochets. But you're going to want to get under both loops of that chain. Pull up your loop somehow, some way. There we go. And finish that half double crochet. Now I'm moving my stitch marker up to this new last half double crochet of the round, and I'll slip stitch join. And what that does is it almost gives us the continuous ridge around like we have over here and over here. It's as close as we can get for this being where the join is. So here is a corner that is not our joined corner, and you can see all of these gorgeous curves coming around. It looks so pretty. And then over here is our joined corner, and the curves still look pretty continuous, but it does look a little different than, if I can just have them side by side to compare, than this corner. For rounds 3 through 8, you're going to do the same thing where you're just half double crochet in the back third loop around, 3 in the corners, and do that join over here. The optional round 9, however, which I'll show you now, is to slip stitch in the back third loop around. I will show you another visual why. So right here, instead of our half double crochets in the back third loop, work a slip stitch. So insert your hook, pull through, continue to pull through. Insert your hook, pull through, continue to pull through. Insert your hook, pull through, continue, and so on and so forth. And what that does, if I can do that without splitting the stitch, oops. What that does is it pushes the top of your final round down a bit so that you end up with what to me looks like a bit of a more uniform look in the final round of the border. And then I just want to show you what a corner looks like. We're not increasing at all in the corner this round. You will simply get to that marked corner and just slip stitch in the back third loop as you would, and then keep going around. When you get to the start, it's just a slip stitch to join. And so you can see what it's doing is it's pushing this top round down so that our ridges are right on top of each other. Whereas over here, if we didn't do that, this row is standing up still. And so what does that look like on the completed project? It looks lovely. I mean, that's just my opinion. I think it looks so nice. We've got all of these ridges right on top of each other, and this final ridge stacks on top. It adds an extra bit of thickness along the edge, which I think is also really nice. I think it looks nice to have that pushed down. Otherwise, this would be kind of standing up. There'd be this gap here. So you'd have all these nice ridges and then a gap at the very edge. So that's why I will do a slip stitch around. I hope you enjoy this pattern. I hope you have a wonderful time. Happy crocheting!